Colonel Janssen of the Cadian 23rd stared in disbelief as rank upon rank of gleaming skeletal figures rose out of the dunes to the left of his armoured column. Sand cascaded from gleaming torsos and hollow sockets as the creatures straightened and began their advance. They had appeared without a sound, clutching long-barreled alien weapons, the first red rays of the morning sun reflecting from hundreds of staring skulls. Necrons. Their gaunt faces were expressionless, betraying no trace of emotion or humanity. But Janssen knew in his gut that they were evil. His hand shook as he grabbed for the Chimera's comlink.
"Hold the advance! All units fire at will!"
he bellowed, and was answered moments later by the roar of his guns. Turrets swiveling to the side, the column of tanks unleashed salvo upon salvo into the steadily advancing Necrons. His guardsmen formed up, running into position and opening fire. Let them taste the might of the Cadian 23rd, thought Janssen, his parched lips twisting into a snarl. Raising his macro binoculars, he focused on a crater of vitrified sand scattered with Necron remains. Pieces of broken machinery and shining debris were crawling back together, the shattered and blackened Necrons rising as they grew whole again. A tall, metallic figure in tattered robes strode across the macro binoculars viewfinder for a second, and Janssen's breath caught as what had been merely a puddle of molten metal and fizzing sparks behind it flowed smoothly back into shape, a shining skeleton once more. Immense monoliths began to crest the ridge, their ponderous advance as silent as the metallic warriors before them. Several bulky Necron skimmers swept from behind another dune, swiveling arcane cannons in the direction of his armoured support. Janssen began to sweat, watching helplessly as the tremendous forces exerted by their bizarre weapons burrowed through the armour of the tanks, leaving gaping holes before the armoured behemoths detonated. Static charged the air, as the dully pulsing crystals on the towering monoliths began to crackle with sickly green light, discharging thick bolts of lightning into yet more of his battle tanks. The incandescent explosion seared his eyeballs, and the backwash of heat singed his skin.
"Fall back! Fall back!"
shouted Janssen, a note of panic in his voice as he watched more Necrons rise from the sand, cutting off their escape. The Cadians were attempting to maneuver backwards in disciplined ranks, but few could penetrate the flaming wall of wreckage barring their way. All that remained of Janssen's once proud tanks. Many of them were on the verge of panic, obstructing their comrades in the confusion. Janssen turned back to the encroaching wall of Necrons as they stalked forward, a look of horror upon his face as he realized they were trapped. As one, the Necron warriors raised their weapons, green hellfire crackling within the chambers of their guns. They fired without breaking step. All around him, Janssen's men writhed and screamed as their armor was stripped away and their flesh flayed from their bones, exposing their viscera before disintegrating completely. Ahead, his adjutant was eviscerated by one of the lethal fields, clutching the bloody ruin of his torso and screaming as an unearthly wind whipped sand across his raw flesh. Directly ahead of him were a group of imposing figures, solid and statuesque, their sculpted features impassive as they slaughtered everything that came within reach. Disciplined veterans who Janssen had commanded for years were falling to their knees like terrified children at their approach. Horrified fascination held his gaze as the towering figures calmly carved men apart with their gleaming scythes. There was no blood. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a Necron warrior swing its long-barreled gun in a wide arc, the heavy blade at its end smashing into the throat of the regiment's standard-bearer. He forced himself to turn, to run. Colonel Janssen stumbled away, vision blurred with tears of fright. He tried to order the retreat, but words would not come. His men were being culled, their every retreat cut off. He ran anyway, but tripped on something, landing heavily. his mouth filling with hot, dry dust. It was a skinned body, wounds still pumping blood, staining the sand. He raised his head to see a hunched, skeletal figure with long fingers like flensing knives ahead of him. The ragged skin of Captain Niels was draped over its bony form as it crept towards him in a low crouch. Janssen tried to scream, but instead he choked on the sand, clogging his throat. The creature reached towards him with its talon knives, and the darkness took him.